So, welcome everyone to our Sol Speaker series for July. I've been looking forward to this talk for a few months now. We're very excited to have Admiral Owen Swart with us today. He is a scholar of Star Trek, a lifelong fan, and a dedicated advocate for biodiversity and wildlife conservation. Owen works hands-on with cheetah conservation, focusing on ambassador animals, human wildlife conflict management and mitigation, and public education. He's inspired by Star Trek's vision of cooperation and sustainability. He applies these principles to protecting endangered species and promoting coexistence between humans and wildlife. So, Owen, I was very, very happy to welcome you to our Sol Speaker Series.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that generous introduction. All right then, shall we begin?
Yes.
Excellent. All right. So, as Bob very kindly mentioned a moment ago, I am Admiral Owen Swart. I am the commanding officer of the USS Dauntless, the regional coordinator for Region 8, and in another very important part of my life, I am a cheetah handler with an organization called Cheetah Outreach. Cheetah Outreach is, well, it's really two different organizations. We'll get to how it's two different organizations in a moment, but the main part that I'm mostly involved in is an ecotourism and educational facility based in Somerset West, which is just outside of Cape Town, South Africa, which is where I live. At Cheetah Outreach, we provide an opportunity for guests, so that's typically international tourists, but locals too, to have a direct hands-on interaction with a cheetah. So if you, like me, are a fan of Star Trek First Contact, you'll recall the scene in which Picard and Data have a moment with the Phoenix, with Zefram Cochrane's ship. And Picard talks about how making physical contact with it connects you to the object in a way that's difficult to describe, but makes it definitely more real. And that is part of our philosophy at Cheetah Outreach as well, which is why our motto is see it, sense it, save it. It's our contention that coming into physical contact with a live, living, breathing cheetah is there's no substitute for I mean, it can't be substituted by looking at images on a screen or even seeing a live animal at a distance through a fence or something like that. It really connects you to that animal in a way that no other engagement opportunity really can. And we're very fortunate that cheetahs are kind of unique when it comes to large predators in that we are able to facilitate these interactions in a way that is both rewarding and stimulating for the guests and safe for everybody, including the cheetah. It's also something that's rewarding and enjoyable for the cheetah. Now, we don't only have cheetahs at our facility, we have an array of different species, all of which are related in one way or another to our conservation mission. And we'll talk about some of those as we go along today. But as a cheetah handler at Cheetah Outreach, I am involved in the care of every single one of these animals, and it is a very gratifying occupation to spend my time on. And it's a real privilege to be able to work with these fine ambassadors and, of course, the humans who are involved in the project as well. But today we're going to be talking about flagship species. And before I define the term, well, by way of defining the term, I'd like to talk about why the cheetah? Why have we chosen the cheetah as our species of interest? Cheetahs are beautiful. They're remarkable. They are iconic in their appearance. They represent grace and speed and athleticism, and they're just generally a very charismatic animal. And that word charismatic is quite important when we're talking about the concept of flagship species. Flagship species are a practice in biodiversity conservation whereby We focus all or most of our efforts on one specific species within an ecosystem, um, in the hopes that that will then have knock-on effects that affect the species surrounding it. And we're going to talk about a few different examples of flagship species today. Specifically, the cheetah. We'll be spending most of our time talking about the cheetah, but we'll also talk about polar bears, humpback whales, pandas, and gray wolves. Now, one thing that all of these species have in common is that they are charismatic. They are beautiful. Uh, they're very cute. Sometimes they're cuddly. You want to give them a hug, not so much with the humpback whale, but humpback whales are cute too in their way. So they are what is called charismatic megafauna. They are large animals that people like. And that's quite important when we're talking with this about this kind of thing, because the key concept here is that conservation isn't just about helping the environment, it's about persuading other people to do their part. Marketing matters. And the easier an animal species is to sell to the general public, if we can convince people that they are worthy of saving, the easier it is to get people involved, get traction, get funding, get attention, and make progress. And dealing with charismatic megafauna is arguably the easiest way of doing that. But there are two different kinds of flagship species. One of those is what we call an umbrella species. So this is a species that exists within an ecosystem, that if we focus on conserving that species, the efforts that we make, the resources that we devote to working with that species will benefit all the species surrounding it, right? So that species has an imaginary umbrella over its head, and that umbrella covers all of the other species that share an ecosystem with it. The other kind of flagship species is called a keystone species, and this is more of an ecological term, whereby in a given ecosystem, some species have a more important role than others. I know we're taught to think about the food web, and every species is equally important, and in a certain way, every species is equally important. But each species will have its ecological niche. It'll have its role. It'll have the things that it does within its ecosystem. And sometimes there's a lot of overlap with other competing species that it shares the ecosystem with. And sometimes it'll have a unique role that only that species does. And when we have one of those, where we have a species that has a unique role, that's called a keystone species. And those are the two different kinds of flagship species. Those are the kinds of species we want to focus in these efforts. So I know that most of the audience is from North America, so I'm going to start with an example that is perhaps a little closer to home for you, and that is the gray wolf. So the gray wolf, specifically, I mean, it's endemic to most of North America and parts of Europe, and Asia as well, I believe. But specifically, we're talking about it in the Yellowstone region, Montana. Um, it was hunted to extinction in the early 20th century, principally by farmers looking to protect their livestock, which is frankly not an unreasonable thing to want to do. Livestock is their livelihood, and wolves were a threat to their livestock and therefore to their livelihood. And the easiest, simplest way of managing that was by hunting those wolves. Um, but obviously, wolves are quite important to the ecosystem, and we'll go through some ways in which that is true in a moment. So in the mid-90s, 1995, a group of gray wolves was reintroduced to the Yellowstone Park. Now, in their absence, what happened was elk populations became particularly troublesome. So gray wolves are an apex predator, elk are a prey species, and although elk are not necessarily the preferred prey of wolves, the presence of the gray wolves in the area was able to regulate the elk population such that they didn't grow to the point that they were destructive to other surrounding species. But once the wolves were removed from that environment, the elk population kind of exploded and trouble ensued, specifically in riverbank ecosystem, right, along the sides of rivers, because the elks would overgraze some of the trees there, willow trees in particular, various other fauna in those areas, which would reduce biodiversity. It would also have a knock-on effect on all of the other species that are dependent on those other species, the various vegetation forms on those riverbanks for their survival, and it had a detrimental effect on the entire thing. Um, but when the wolves were reintroduced, all kinds of interesting things happened. First of all, the wolves were able to, through hunting, they were able to regulate the elk population a little bit better, but not only through hunting. So there's an interesting effect here where the presence of wolves had a disruptive effect on the behavior of the elk that were endemic to the area. The elk are afraid of the wolves, the ecology of fear, it's called. And so they would change their behavioral patterns and would avoid those riparian areas, allowing them to regrow. Those willow trees were able to grow back. Beavers, which obviously use the timber from willow trees, were able to repopulate the riparian areas. Songbirds came back because they were living in the trees. Scavengers will also benefit from wolf kills. So all of these different ways in which the wolf was an important keystone in that surrounding ecosystem system were able to kick back up again once those wolves were reintroduced to the Yellowstone Park. And what's interesting about wolves is because they don't only contribute to the ecosystem in one way, they don't only contribute by being predators, they contribute by simply by their presence. They are considered um, ecosystem engineers through what they call the trophic cascade. So the wolves eat the elk, which means that there are fewer elk to eat the vegetation, which means that there's more food available for other species, and so on. So wolves are a keystone species in one particular ecosystem, and that's the riparian ecosystem. But wolves also cover large areas of space. They have wide ranges and they go over long distance. And that allows them to also serve as an umbrella species because if you're creating safe areas, safe spaces for those wolves to move through, you are also creating areas that are safe for all of the other species that share that environment with the wolves, even if they don't interact with the wolves directly or even indirectly. Um, so it's a keystone species contextually in very specific environments, in some habitats, but not in others. The Yellowstone area includes not only riparian areas, but also mountainous areas and prairies and things like that. So specifically in those river areas, that it is considered a keystone species, but not over the broader area, but over the entire ecosystem where it exists, it's considered an umbrella species. Downside, however, of the reintroduction of the wolf is that those farmers who were protecting their livestock, their descendants are still there. They're still farming livestock in those adjacent areas. And so they had to come up with mitigation strategies to deal with the presence of this new apex predator that they hadn't dealt with in their lifetime that had been reintroduced to the area. And we'll get to how they did that in a little while. But first, we're going to talk about a different flagship species that might be familiar too. The panda, the giant panda, which is indigenous to parts of Asia, um, is not a keystone species. So it is entirely herbivorous. It eats almost exclusively bamboo. The bulk of its diet. Unlike most other bears, it's not a true bear. It's sort of a cousin of the bears. Unlike true bears, it's not carnivorous at all. It pretty much only eats plants. Um, but because it's herbivorous, it has to also cover a relatively wide um, range in order to fulfill its calories. It's a very large animal and it needs to graze a lot to meet its nutritional needs, which means that the habitat, the area that it covers, is relatively large. And those bamboo montane forests, so forests up in the mountains in parts of China where those pandas are indigenous, um, if the Chinese government does and has devote significant resources to conserving those pandas, that entire montane bamboo forest is conserved as a result, which includes other competing species that share a habitat with it. The red panda, the golden snub-nosed monkey, and a variety of other endemic species. And this is exactly what's happened. The Chinese government has recognized the need to conserve this whole habitat, this whole ecosystem, and so they have used to great success the panda as their flagship species, representing that whole environment. Not only have they devoted their own funding to it, but they have devised a very clever scheme for attracting funding from overseas, and that is by using giant pandas as what they call diplomatic gifts. So they were able to take captive pandas and place them in international zoos around the world. Every panda that you see in a zoo today is not the property of that zoo, but is the property of the Chinese government on loan to that other zoo. And it's international best practice, and in some countries it's even in the law that if you have a an exotic animal in your zoo collection, you are obliged to provide funding to that animal's country of origin in order to conserve the environment where that animal is endemic. And so this has happened. So funding from all of these international zoos has been funneled back to the parts of China where the panda is indigenous, and that has been used to good effect to create safe spaces for the panda and all of the other species that share the environment with it. So much so that they've been able to create green corridors to connect the different zones of montane bamboo forest that had been disconnected through habitat loss as a result of human development and various other natural forces. And it's been so effective that the panda has been downgraded on the IUCN list from endangered down to vulnerable. So this is which means it's not quite out of the woods yet. There's still work to be done, but it's moving in the right direction, and that's an encouraging story. Another example, just as cute and just as fluffy, is the polar bear. So, polar bear is something of a keystone species. In its habitat, which is the Arctic Circle, it is an apex predator. It is the top of the food chain, and it hunts other animals, largely other predators like seals. And it actually helps to regulate seal populations because nothing else is big enough to hunt a seal. So it creates top-down predation as opposed to that ecosystem engineering, that middle out effect that the gray wolves do. This is a top-down management effect. So they're quite important then in that ecosystem, managing the populations of those mid-level predators, the seals. So they are a keystone species in that way. But they are also an umbrella species in that they have been used to represent the entire Arctic ecosystem and the various other species that share that ecosystem with it. The predators, even like seals, walrus, Arctic foxes, seagulls. Um, and it has become the poster child for sea ice and for anthropogenic climate change. The challenge with using the polar bear is that okay, so we're going to talk downsides. It has been very effective over decades now, representing the challenge of anthropogenic climate change, and specifically as that results in sea ice lost in the Arctic Circle, because pandas need ice. Although they are good swimmers, they need to get out of the water in order to feed and to reproduce. And the less sea ice there is, the less place there is for them to do that, and their habitat shrinks a little bit every year. So the downside to using the panda as an umbrella species is that it has taken a very long time, decades. And frankly, we're no closer now than we were when we started. If anything, we're further away from finding a solution that makes that work. Because the problem of anthropogenic climate change is a very large problem. It's not a local issue where we can just set up a private reserve where the pandas can be, where the polar bears can be safe. That's just not how this works. It's a global issue, and stuff needs to be done worldwide in order to preserve that sea ice. And because it's such a big problem and such a complicated problem, because frankly, we don't even have all that much of a consensus on how to go about fixing that problem. I mean, don't get me wrong, I'm not suggesting we don't have a consensus about the existence of anthropogenic climate change. Don't quote me on that. But what I am saying is that solving that problem is incredibly difficult, and nobody really has a good answer about how to go about doing that. We have some clues, we have some ideas, but frankly, we're no closer now than we were 20 years ago, 30 years ago. Um, and that's one of the downsides right there, is that using a marketing animal like the polar bear leads to having to condense marketing messages down to digestible sound bites, which has the knock-on effect of essentially oversimplifying climate narratives. of taking something that's very complicated and very difficult to understand, and still isn't completely understood, even by experts in the field, and reducing it down to quick, short messages about what we can do to solve climate change at home. Um, and because that's been going on for decades now, you end up with something called compassion fatigue, where we've been caring about the pandas for a very long time, and we still care about the pandas, but nothing's changed. So they just start wearing out. They start getting tired of it. You start to think, well, I recycle, I drive an electric vehicle, I've done my part. Why aren't the pandas getting better? Because that narrative, that problem is so complicated and so big, it just becomes a difficult nut to crack. And it also runs the risk of prioritizing awareness of the problem. Just being aware of the fact that anthropogenic climate change is an issue, prioritizes that over doing actual things towards solving the problem. I mean, what do we even do? Does recycling even help climate change? Hard to say. Um, so it's just such a big, difficult problem that although it initially it seemed to be a successful marketing strategy to attach the anthropogenic climate change problem to the flagship species of the polar bear, um, the longer that continues, the more difficult it is to measure those positive outcomes, if any. Um, but these are all, as I said, charismatic animals. They're big, fluffy, cute. What about attempts to use animals that are not fluffy and cute uh, as flagship species? Has that been tried, and how did it go? Well, it has. So this is an animal affectionately known as the tree lobster, which is more accurately known as the Lord Howe Island stick insect, which well, it's not cute. So it's about this long. It's an enormous thing, and it's terrifying to behold. Um, Let me tell you its story. So it was presumed extinct back in 1920 after rats were introduced to Lord Howe Island, which is just a little island off the coast of Australia. And it seemed to be gone because rats found them delicious. But it was rediscovered in 2001 on a remote outcrop of the island where the rats couldn't get to. There was still a relic population of these Lord Howe Island stick insects, of the tree lobsters. So there was an attempt at the time to characterize these as what they call the Lazarus species. You may be familiar with the concept of with the it's almost a meme at this point of the Tasmanian tiger, the thylacine, which was a predator endemic to Australia that went extinct also in the early 20th century. There have been supposed sightings of it over the subsequent decades in the wild, but nobody's really confirmed any of those sightings. And it's been a wish of many biologists that it might be possible to resurrect the thylacine from a relic population or from a DNA sample or something like that, and have the thylacine be a Lazarus species. But in the absence of that, marketing people in Australia had hoped to make the tree lobster the Lazarus species that actually could be achieved. Downsides of using this animal as a flagship was that it's creepy looking, it's kind of scary. Um, it's it's not cute, it's not fluffy, it's not cuddly, and predictably that resulted in limited public engagement with the campaign. Fortunately, not a lot of resources were required to repopulate Lord Howe Island with this insect. It was a relatively inexpensive and relatively easy project to embark upon. So even though there wasn't very much public engagement, there was just enough that they were able to succeed at that. And as of today, the Lord Howe Island stick insect is doing pretty well, I hear, on Lord Howe Island. So if you ever are visiting Lord Howe Island, be sure to watch out for tree lobsters. Another example, perhaps a little closer to home for you, for most of you, is uh, the North American freshwater mussel. Now, this is not one species. There are about 300 different species from two different genera. And these are, as you might expect, they're mollusks. They live underwater, specifically in fresh water, so rivers and lakes, of which there are many in North America. And there ecological niche is quite important to those ecosystems because they are natural water filters. They'll eat the kind of stuff that make water gross, dirty, thus improving water quality for other species, and it helps to support local ecosystems. They're even edible to things like beavers and otters. Um, so there was an attempt to use them as an umbrella species for those freshwater ecosystems, and that just didn't work really at all. Not only is it not cuddly or cute, it doesn't even have a face. So it doesn't even have some of the benefits that the Lord Howe Island stick insect has. As terrifying as the tree lobster is, at least it has a little face. This doesn't even have that. So this it did not work. It wasn't even viable to promote it as a food crop because they're not good to eat. They're not delicious. There's risk of poisoning because they're filter feeders. They get all the poison out of the water. You can't even eat them. So there really wasn't. This campaign was kind of dead in the water from the beginning. Unintentional pun. But now, having gone through those, we get to the species that I'm most interested in, and that is the cheetah. So cheetahs are a great flagship species because they are highly charismatic. They're beautiful, iconic. They represent speed and elegance and majesty. In cultural history, they represent associations with royalty and divinity. They're just a perfect candidate for this kind of a campaign. And what makes them unique is that they can appeal not only to special interest people who are interested in conservation, the kinds of people who might, for example, go on a safari holiday and where you can see them in the wild, but they are also marketable as docile ambassadors. I use that word docile under advisement. It's not, they're not docile like a house cat. But relative to other large predators, they're relatively calm. So cheetahs which are hand raised, they're bred in captivity and raised by hand, surrounded by humans, can be bred in such a way and raised in such a way that they can be quite comfortable being surrounded by humans and having hands-on interactions with humans in a perfectly safe and comfortable way. And that's how we do it at Cheetah Outreach. Um, and we're not the only place that does this. There are a number of other facilities, even in South Africa, that have touch encounters with cheetahs because they are uniquely well suited to this kind of work, as opposed to other large predators like lions or hyenas, which, although they would probably like a little scratch behind the ears, it's not safe. They can't be trusted to behave themselves. Whereas cheetahs, being relatively, again, docile, if raised properly and treated correctly, it's safe for everybody, including the cheetah. So can cheetahs be considered a keystone species? Um, kind of. Not really. Okay, so cheetahs they're technically class one predators. They're apex predators in that nothing else eats cheetahs. They are at the top of their food chain, but they are vulnerable to attacks from other large predators. Lions, hyenas, leopards will kill cheetahs if they come across them in the wild to eliminate competition. So they are not technically apex predators. They're what's called mesopredators. What that means is they don't exert top-down control on that food chain. They're not even the most populous or most prodigious predators in their ecosystem. They're very successful predators, and they carry their weight in terms of managing populations. But things like lions and leopards, there's just more of them. Cheetahs are more suited for the other strategy, using them as an umbrella species. So cheetahs are actually perfect for that because, like the gray wolves, they cover very large territories. Male cheetahs will mark out a territory that has to be large enough that they can find a reliable source of prey in their territory without having to stray into their neighbor's territory. And in some parts of the African savanna, that has to be a pretty large area. And if you want to encompass multiple male cheetah territories in your reserve, in your safe space for the cheetahs, we're talking about a very large area, which means that they are suitable as a proxy for what they call landscape scale conservation. So we're talking large nature reserves, game reserves, national parks, that kind of thing. They make an excellent candidate for that kind of conservation. Now, what are the threats to cheetah survival in the wild? Why are we particularly interested in them? So the principal one, the one that has had the biggest effect on their population over the last century or so, is farmer conflict. So this is something that they share also with the gray wolves in North America. They are predators and they operate in the wild. And when farmers move into that former cheetah habitat or into that cheetah habitat, they bring their livestock with them. Livestock is sometimes predated upon by wild predators, and the farmers then will turn to lethal predator control to persecute those predators in order to protect their livestock and their livelihood. Again, that's a perfectly rational response. You can't really blame the farmers for wanting to do that. What's slightly different here is that the cheetahs are not likely to be the culprits for livestock predation. Cheetahs have a very particular hunting style, which requires the prey to be running away at high speed. And that's not really something that sheep do. Goats tend not to run fast enough for a cheetah to catch them. And sheep are just too big. Cheetahs can only predate on animals that are smaller than themselves. So a small lamb or a small goat might be viable in terms of size, but they're just not capable of playing that chasing game that the cheetahs require in order to take down their prey. And we know this by looking at cheetah scat in the wild. There is currently a census underway in northern South Africa where they're doing exactly that. Field rangers are going around and examining the DNA that they find in cheetah droppings that they find. And it's not zero, but the amount of livestock DNA that they find in that scat is very small. Cheetahs are typically just not interested in livestock. It's not their preferred prey. It's usually other predators, lions, leopards, hyenas, jackals, caracals. They are the ones that will take on livestock species. But what all of those species share is that they are nocturnal, whereas the cheetah is diurnal, active during the day, and is one of the few predators that is active during the day. So farmers who exist in that space, but we're typically talking about not big corporate farmers, we're talking about small subsistence farmers, people who aren't necessarily well educated, they don't necessarily understand ecology or biology very well outside of their specific area of focus when it comes to their livestock animals. They won't necessarily know that it's not cheetahs that are preying on their livestock. So that being the case, it's understandable when a farmer wakes up in the morning and he finds that one of his goats has been killed, and he looks around and the first predator he sees is a cheetah. He's going to blame the cheetah for having made that kill, even though it probably wasn't actually the cheetah. So cheetahs are targeted, they're considered pests by these farmers, and they are killed as a result. Now, this impact has had a disproportionate apologies, my headset turned itself off. This impact has had a disproportionate effect on cheetah populations, such that about a century ago, there were roughly 100,000 cheetahs worldwide. Today, that's down to around 6,500 in the world. That's including cheetahs living in captive environments, protected spaces, and the free roaming wild. It's a tiny number. Um, and cheetahs are uniquely vulnerable to this effect for a few reasons we'll talk about in a moment. They also have that pressure from competing predators. Okay, they're not then, as I said, they're mesopredators, they're not apex predators, so they have to compete with all of those other predators that they share their habitat with. Although they do have their niche hunting during the day, they're still around at night, they still have to sleep. And another important aspect is that although cheetahs are very successful hunters, their hunting strategy is very effective. They'll take down their prey something like 50 to 60% of the time, which is a very high success rate. They're the third most successful African predator. Um, Once they've done that chase, they've run at 70 miles an hour for 30 seconds, they've exhausted their prey, they've gone in for the suffocation bite, and the animal is now dead. The cheetah has to rest for about half an hour before he's able to start consuming the prey that he's just killed, because his own heart rate is through the roof, 200 beats per minute. His respiratory rate is so high that he just can't swallow. So he will abandon that carcass, go find a safe spot nearby. He'll go and rest, go and sleep, half an hour or so, and then he'll come back to the carcass and start feeding. Problem is that carcass is then unguarded during that time. Any other predator or scavenger that comes across it during those 30 minutes is likely to steal that prey off him. And cheetahs are adapted for running. They are slender, they're very powerful runners. They are not powerful fighters. They're not built to take on a combat with another predator. So they'll just abandon that kill and hope to try again later. They'll lose up to half of their kills that way. So pressures from competing predators are an issue. Habitat loss is another important factor. Not only farmland, but just human development in general has encroached on cheetah habitats such that many vast tracts of land that were once cheetah habitat are now no longer suitable for them. That includes here where I am in Cape Town. 400 years ago, when the first European settlers arrived, they documented sightings of cheetahs all over the place here. But it's been hundreds of years since one has been sighted in this area. You just don't get them here anymore. And that has just spread further and further north, such that now in South Africa, the last remaining vestige of land where free roaming cheetahs are able to exist is along our northern border, which is relatively densely populated by humans, but that's growing. As the urban areas in those regions expand, that terrain becomes no longer suitable for cheetah. Another factor that's unique to cheetahs is that they suffered a genetic bottleneck. What does that mean? So around 200,000 years ago, cheetahs were the most widely dispersed large predator in the world. They could be found on all six contiguous continents, both Americas, Asia, Europe, and Africa. They were found all over. But at the end of the Pleistocene, there was a mass extinction of many other species of megafauna, things like woolly mammoths, woolly rhinos, saber-toothed tigers. All of those things went extinct, and the cheetah very nearly went extinct as well, except for a very small population of only a couple hundred individuals that were alive in Africa at the time that managed to survive. Because it was such a small population, they were relatively closely related to one another, which meant that their genetic diversity was not very high. They then spread out from that relic population once conditions were more suitable for them to do so, but that genetic bottleneck resulting in them all being relatively closely related to one another remains a problem. They're so closely related, for example, that all cheetahs today share a blood type. If you're doing a blood transfusion from one cheetah to another, which doesn't happen very often, but if you were to do that, you wouldn't even have to check for blood type compatibility because they're all the same. They're basically all cousins. So in order to maximize, we're going to talk about maximizing genetic population, so diversity in a moment. But it is an issue with cheetahs in the wild that their closest neighbors are all relatively closely related to them, which means that when two cheetahs mate, they are too closely related to one another. They both have identical copies of the same gene. Neither one has a dominant allele that can take the place of another. So negative mutations can creep into the population over time, and then they just don't have an opportunity to be bred out because everybody's so closely related. And that gets worse as the cheetah habitat shrinks because they get isolated into these little pockets where they're already relatively closely related, and now they can't interbreed between the different pockets, so they get even more genetically isolated within those little pockets. So that's a real problem. Another major issue which affects cheetahs, which is not so much of an issue down here in southern Africa, it's more up north East Africa. And that is the illegal pet trade. There is a legacy of cheetahs being kept by royalty in the ancient past. Queen Cleopatra VII was famous for having owned thousands of cheetahs in her stables during her life. She used them as coursing animals. They would help to hunt. And of course, being the Queen of Egypt, she was able to keep them in good health and look after them and make sure that they were happy and healthy. But that legacy persists in some parts of the world today where people associate owning a cheetah with status, with royalty, with affluence. And so people will seek out owning a cheetah as a pet in order to signal that to their contemporaries. Now, cheetah breeding in captivity is very, very difficult, and we'll talk about that soon. Um, so much so that there's no real way to do that for pets. The only way to source these pets is to steal them from the wild through a practice called live poaching. Poachers will go out into the cheetah habitat, they'll find a mother with cubs, they'll typically kill the mother, capture the cubs, and then ship them into the black market, which is then distributes them to various places around the world. Um, those cubs typically won't survive the trip. Most of them die. And if they do make it to their destination, they are mutilated. They'll be defanged, declawed. They'll receive poor diets. Most of them don't see their first birthday. It's devastating, but it's a continuous problem. So those are the survival issues that cheetahs face. Um, but there are mitigation strategies. There are conservation modalities that we can engage in to try and um, help the cheetahs get edge their way back from the brink. Um, the first leg of those conservation modalities are firstly creating protected areas, big, wide spaces where cheetahs are safe, where they're looked after by things like game rangers, men with guns, large fences, and that will then reduce the amount of poaching that can happen. Here in Southern Africa, people have the resources to do that, both between government agencies and private tourism industry. That's that's pretty good. We can do that quite well. Up in Northeast Africa, there just aren't the resources to do that. Tourism isn't enough of a drive there, at least not ecotourism, and government agencies barely exist, if at all. So it's very, very difficult up there. Um, so creating protective areas is quite important. Then there's captive breeding, which I said was very difficult. Difficult, but not impossible. It was only actually figured out in the 1990s, more or less, how to breed cheetahs in captivity. Um, and what it requires is mimicking cheetahs' natural breeding behavior, where female cheetahs are very picky. They are induced ovulators. They will only ovulate in the presence of a suitable male. So they, in the wild, would go and seek out potential mates, and if they find one that they think is suitable, or she thinks is suitable, she'll test him for a few days, make sure that he holds up, and then she will mate with him, and she'll typically mate with all of his brothers. Cheetah males live together in coalitions, and then might even be able to go and seek out a neighboring coalition next door and repeat the process. She's got a 9-day window in which she can do that. So that one litter of cubs can have multiple fathers. So there's no paternity certainty, which means that cheetah males, if they come across cubs in the wild, won't kill those cubs because he doesn't know whether or not those cubs are his. So breeding cheetah. Oh, another thing is that cheetah moms, when pregnant, if they face moments of high stress, so presence of other large predators, absence of food, that kind of thing, if it's too stressful, she can spontaneously abort that pregnancy and reabsorb those fetuses. So very sensitive, which is again a rational thing to do. So in breeding in captivity, we have to replicate all of those things. Firstly, the female needs to have wide open spaces. Female cheetahs are solitary. They need to be a long distance away from males who are not interested in breeding. She needs to be offered her choice of all of the males that she might possibly want to breed with so that she can then choose which one she wants and then induce ovulation as a result. And she then needs to live a stress-free existence while she's pregnant so that she can carry those cubs to term. And then she also needs enough space and support and encouragement that she can raise those cubs into adulthood. Which brings us to the next step, which is what they call meta-population management. So this is a strategy whereby every cheetah that is bred in captivity has its DNA profile logged on a stud book and is shared internationally. So that cheetah breeders, oh dear, my camera has frozen. Let me switch to my backup camera. There we go. It looks like that's happened. Good. Okay. Cheetah breeders are able to optimize the genetic diversity of their breeding populations in those captive environments. So they can make sure that cheetahs that are as distantly related from one another as possible are presented with each other so that they have good opportunities for breeding in that way. So that's difficult but achievable. It also means that cheetah populations that have already been bred and placed into wild states, so living in sort of private nature reserves and places like that, and even national parks that have distinct genetic traits. Those cheetah families can be translocated into different reserves so that they can introduce their diverse genetics to that other population. So this is something that we can manage in captive cheetahs, cheetahs that are living under human protection. We can't really do this with wild cheetahs very often, just because it's not ethical to interrupt their lifestyle in order to interfere with them in that way. Think of it as a ecological prime directive. But that is also the way we do that is through soft release. So these captive bred cheetahs are raised in such a way that they are hands off, even though humans are involved in protecting them and in making sure that they're safe and comfortable. They are raised in such a way that they do not associate humans with food or with comfort. And so they retain that healthy fear of humans in the wild so that they can then be reintroduced into wild areas, typically private nature reserves where they are the largest predator. They don't have to compete with other large predators, but they can then be allowed to live out their lives as wild cheetahs and then even reproduce and produce multiple generations of cheetahs. This is also a protocol that is relatively new. Only sort of in the last 10 years or so has it been figured out how to train captive bred cheetahs so that they can survive in the wild on their own, but it works pretty well. When it comes to the cub poaching, really the only two modalities that we have, when I say we, Cheetah Outreach doesn't do this work. This is done principally by the Cheetah Conservation Fund based in Namibia. They have a satellite office up in, I think it's Somaliland, somewhere around there. And they do this kind of work. And what they do there is they monitor the ports. So as those cubs that have been harvested from the wild are being shipped out overseas, they have to go through a port. And if they are able to spot those cheetah cubs as they're moving through the ports, they are confiscated and then they are rescued and rehabilitated at their safe house facilities in the area. Those cubs can never be reintroduced into the wild, but at least they can live out their lives in relative safety. And they are rescuing something like 300 cubs a year, which represents a significant fraction of the cheetah population in that part of Africa. Yeah, they're prodigious. But at Cheetah Outreach, our specific focus, and this is not Cheetah Outreach, the educational facility, this is the Cheetah Outreach Trust, which is our parent organization. Our specific focus is in human predator conflict mitigation. So we have that conflict between farmers and predators that I spoke about a few times, experienced by cheetahs and also by gray wolves and some other predatory species. Our focus is on helping to mitigate that issue. And the way we do that is through this beautiful animal on the screen here, which is an Anatolian shepherd. So this is a dog, a breed that comes from the Anatolian Peninsula, modern-day Turkey, has been bred there for thousands of years, specifically as a livestock guardian. So they have all the relevant instincts baked in. They require no training. As a pup that can get placed with a herd of livestock, it will imprint on that herd and will consider it its family, will defend it to the death if necessary. But Anatolians have a very high protective drive and a very low prey drive. They're unlikely to get involved in a fight. They'll just live with the herd of livestock. And she's, as you can see, she's a big, intimidating dog. She's got a very scary bark. She's very strong, very powerful, very keen senses, very alert. And she will defend simply by being present the livestock that she lives with 24/7. She'll just live with them. And her presence is usually enough to deter most predators. A cheetah wouldn't even think of interfering with an animal like that. Even something as big as a lion or a leopard would think twice before tangling with a dog like this. I mean, sure, in a fight between an Anatolian and a lion, the lion would win, but it would take some damage, and it's probably not worth this, the attempt when there is an unguarded herd of antelope down the road. I'm not going to mess with this herd of sheep if I'm a lion and I come across an Anatolian. Very, very effective system. And it's been used also in the areas surrounding Yellowstone Park for farmers to repel wolves. And that is Cheetah Outreach's project. So we have a breeding facility where we breed Anatolian shepherds up in the northern parts of South Africa, specifically Uppington, which is close to the free-roaming cheetah habitat. And we have field officers that will go out and interact with the farmers in the area. They will educate them about our project, and they will breed and provide an Anatolian Shepherd puppy to that farmer for free for the first year. We will pay for everything: the breeding, the food, medical expenses, training for the staff, the works. If the farmer, but the farmer has to agree to cease all lethal predator control methods, guns, traps, poison, has to stop all of that. Farmer has to agree to rely entirely on the dog to protect his livestock, which, as you can imagine, might be a tough sell. But after that first year, if the farmer is satisfied with the results, then he can take over the dog. And so far, we've had a very high adoption rate. The dogs are very, very successful. When it comes to small livestock species, things like goats, for example, it's not uncommon for farmers to see annual losses of 30 to 60% of their goats. But once they switch from the lethal predator control to the dogs, that drops to 0 to 5%. Very, very effective. More so than electric fences or any other non-lethal predator control method. So Anatolian Shepherds are our strategy for managing predator farmer conflict. And that's what we do. We've been doing this for a couple of decades now. We've deployed 400 dogs covering over 500,000 hectares of farmland, and the results are good. Farmers are happy. In terms of the results, as far as cheetahs are concerned, that's a little more complicated. Getting good numbers on cheetah population is very difficult. Cheetahs are scarce. They avoid humans. And so doing a comprehensive census is a non-trivial challenge. There is one underway at the moment using a variety of modalities, including eyewitness reports, camera traps, drone photography, various other methodologies to try and get an accurate picture of just how many wild cheetahs there are. Early indications are that the decline in cheetah populations has slowed. It still seems to be declining, but not as quickly as it was, which is encouraging. But that data is hardly definitive, and we're hoping for a more comprehensive census to come out very soon. But these Anatolian Shepherds don't only benefit cheetahs, right? The cheetahs are an umbrella species, so they help other species that the cheetahs share their environment with, such as caracals. Caracal is a mid-sized predatory cat, sometimes called a desert lynx, erroneously so, although it looks a lot like a lynx. It's not a lynx at all. It's quite distantly related. So the caracal has a lot of the similar adaptations, similar in size, has the short tail and the long pointy ears, and fills a similar ecological niche to the lynx. They are very strong, powerful predatory cats, capable of jumping 3 meters, what's that, 9, 10 feet straight up into the air and catching a bird out of the air. But so strong and so powerful that they can take down prey 3 or 4 times their own size. So she can take down something the size of a small goat or a sheep, something 50, 60 kilograms. So what's that? 100, 120 pounds. That's a sizable animal that she's capable of subduing. I say she, this isn't a picture of our caracal Grace, but the caracal ambassador that we have at Cheetah Outreach is a female, Grace. Very, very powerful cat, and definitely a hazard to farmers. They are considered pests. Many farmers will shoot them on sight. But caracals will not approach a herd of livestock that's being guarded by an Anatolian shepherd. Same is true of the black-backed jackal, which is a small canid. Jackal means fox, but jackals are not foxes. They're in the genus Canis, which means that they are a species of wolf. Looks a bit like a coyote, I suppose. Smaller than a coyote, the size of a large fox, looks kind of fox-like, but is definitely a wolf, has the full package of wolf abilities, including being very intelligent, very social, very adaptable, very very sneaky in their hunting style, and they also can gang up and take down prey much larger than themselves. These are an absolute pest to farmers, but also will avoid the Anatolian shepherd. But it's not only animals that are actually pests to farmers that benefit. Something like a serval, which is a close cousin of the caracal, similar in size. Servals have a very different ecological niche. They only prey on much smaller animals. They're extremely dexterous. They are capable of reaching down into uh, burrows dug by rodents and things like that. They're capable also of jumping very, very high, snatching birds on the wing. They will even catch things like fish and frogs, but only prey much smaller than themselves, which means that they're actually potentially of benefit to farmers because they are providing a pest control role. So those kinds of small animals can interfere with farming activities. And if servals are helping to manage the populations of those kinds of vermin, then that makes the farmer's life easier. But servals also get targeted by lethal predator control methods. They kind of look a little bit like cheetahs, especially at a distance, so they'll get shot thinking that they're shooting a baby cheetah. They will fall prey to indiscriminate lethal predator control. They get caught in snares. They'll get poisoned for poison left out for things like jackals and caracals. So if all those lethal predator control methods are gone from the environment, then the serval benefits too. And the same is true of bat-eared foxes. Bat-eared foxes are not true foxes. They're sort of cousins of the fox, but they're in their own genus. And they aren't even carnivores, not really. They're primarily insectivorous. Their preferred meal is termites, and termites, you might know, is potentially destructive to farm infrastructure because they'll consume wood. But a single bat-eared fox is capable of eating up to 1 million termites a year. And so they are very effective at managing termite populations in and around farm areas. But they are also opportunistic scavengers. They'll eat poisoned meat if they come across it. They'll get caught in snares. They'll even be shot on occasion because from a distance they kind of sort of look a little bit like a black-backed jackal. So again, once those lethal predator control methods are eliminated from the environment, then all of these species win. Uh, So here at Cheetah Outreach, we are able to forge an alliance between these two unlikely species. We've got the dogs and the cats working together for each other's benefit. This photograph is of what our latest ambassador. On the left, his name is Zorro. He's a cheetah cub, and he is being raised alongside Victor, who is an Anatolian Shepherd pup. It's relatively common practice in captive environments when you have a solo cheetah cub. So cheetah cubs, especially, and males in particular, are very intensely social and they need a lot of companionship. But if you only have one cub, that cub really needs a companion. So a lot of zoos and captive environments will raise the cub alongside a Labrador retriever pup. Labrador retrievers are a perfect match because they're similar in size to the cheetah. They're very calm, very patient, very tolerant. And so the feisty little cheetah cub can play rough with his dog companion, and it's fun for both of them. They'll typically live together for the rest of their lives. Because our project focuses on Anatolian Shepherds, we've opted to raise Zorro with an Anatolian Shepherd pup. Um, Anatolian Shepherds have a lot of the same characteristics as retrievers. They're also very patient. They're very protective, and we have managed to forge a very deep bond between these two baby animals. They're now a little bit bigger than this now. They're both around 9 or 10 months of age, and the project is going very, very well to integrate these two. They are fast friends, best of friends, and they are brothers for life. But there's one more flagship species I haven't touched on yet, which relates more to our Star Trek context, and that is the humpback whale. So, humpback whale was hunted to near extinction. In 1980, the global population, well, it was difficult to tell because whales are difficult to count, but some estimates place the total population number as low as 5,000, so that's less than cheetahs today. Um, and it looked like we were about to lose them. But in the 1970s, there was an album released of whale song, which was an audio recording of humpback whales singing, and that captured the public imagination. It led to the formation of the Save the Whales campaign in the 1980s. And of course, in Star Trek, we're very familiar with Star Trek 4, The Voyage Home in 1986, which was very much inspired by and in line with the Save the Whales campaign. What happened around the same year, well, around the same time in the same year, was a ban, an international ban on commercial whaling. So Star Trek 4 captured the zeitgeist and coincided with this legal action, which made it illegal then to hunt humpback whales. Um, and that has been quite successful. So humpback whales, are they a keystone species? Kind of. Whales provide a few things to their local environments. They provide what they call the whale pump. So whales that dive very deep and then have to come back up to the surface again to breathe, that creates sort of a vortex motion which churns up that seawater and brings oxygen from the surface down further into deeper waters, and then churns up some of that dead, sort of deoxygenated water back up to the surface so that it can be reoxygenated again. And there's also a phenomenon called whale fall, which is when a whale dies, its carcass will sink to the floor of the ocean and then becomes food for a variety of other critters. A whole ecosystem is based around whale fall. But why are humpbacks not a good keystone species? Because those same factors apply to all baleen whales. They all do that. So humpbacks are not unique in that way. Right whales, blue whales, they all fall into that same category. They're probably a better fit as an umbrella species because the efforts that have been used to benefit humpback whales benefit all other marine cetaceans, baleen whales, toothed whales, dolphins, porpoises, the works. Um, it it also benefits open ocean ecosystems as a whole, again, because of these things that whales provide, which has also been secondarily beneficial for fish stocks. It helps to manage krill populations because the more whales there are, the more krill they eat, especially baleen whales. That's what they consume, is these tiny little crustaceans. And also helps to benefit seabirds. So the success of the humpback whale Save the Whales campaign has meant that their population, which was estimated as low as 5,000 in 1980, which is not that long ago, if you're my age, um, has rebounded to a global estimate of roughly 100,000 humpback whales today. So that's 2 orders of magnitude that population has exploded in. It was downgraded from endangered, which it was in the 1980s, to least concern, which is that's a global categorization. In specific areas, individual populations vary on that scale, but as a species, humpback whales are now least concern. We're not all that worried about the future of humpback whales. It's a major success story. And this is exactly the same kind of success that could be applied to another species that has similar numbers, like cheetahs, if we only devote our efforts in the right direction. All right. Okay. So that's all I needed to say, and I've talked longer than I said I would. So if anybody has any questions, now would probably be a good time.
Thank you so much, Owen. That was really, really informative. I love the overview of all the species, and it really helps us to, I think, connect the web of life on the planet and how things are intricately linked with one another. I'm going to switch to removing the spotlight on you and going back to our gallery view. Um, so if anyone has a question, if you could raise your hand, we will go ahead and uh, call you out. See if I see anybody here. Gallery. There we go. I know Commander, is it Chemily? Wanted to introduce herself. She got her audio working.
I did, yeah, it's Shamali is the surname.
Raleigh, thank you.
Yes, thank you. I just wanted to say earlier as well that I'm in Region 8 as well, so I'm very happy to be serving under Admiral Owen Swart directly. Very, very happy to have been here.
It's
I also
it's
do have a question, if that's all right. I
Sure.
just wanted to know what the day or a typical day for you would look like in Cheetah Outreach.
Oh, thank you. Um, so yes, so a typical day at Cheetah Outreach would look something like we begin the day at around 8 a.m. Um, and that begins with husbandry rounds. So that's feeding all of the animals. We've got 7 cheetahs at the moment. We've got a caracal, a serval, 2 black-backed jackals, 4 bat-eared foxes, and 10 meerkats, 4 dogs, and too many leopard tortoises. All of those need to be fed. So we have to bring the food out to each one of those enclosures and feed each animal by hand. We have to clean the enclosures, which means their bedding. We need to remove the overnight fecals. The larger mammals, especially the cheetahs and the dogs, need to be rotated. So they move into different camps each day as part of their enrichment. So they're not just isolated to one camp. They get to get a different view. They get to smell different things, see different things, and just having a walk between the different enclosures as part of their enrichment. So that all has to happen first thing in the morning as well. We bleach all of their water containers, and that usually brings us to around 10 a.m., which is when we open to the public. And that's when guests start to come in, and we spend most of the day introducing guests to cheetahs. So they will come in, they'll have a safety briefing in which they're instructed on how to very particularly approach the cheetah and stroke him in a very specific way so that nothing surprises him, nothing is uncomfortable or unpleasant for him. I will then sit with the cheetah myself and make sure that he's happy and comfortable and feels like he's in control of the situation. And then we'll bring the guests in 4 or 5 at a time and allow them the opportunity to stroke the cheetah, spend a bit of time with him, have a photograph taken with him. And while all of that's happening, we're explaining the plight of the cheetah, the benefit of the dog program, and answering any questions the guests might have about cheetah. At the end of the day, we have a second husbandry round, which is usually just feeding. A lot of the animals are fed twice a day, so we'll do a second feeding round. We'll move again all the cheetahs and dogs into different camps for their overnight stay, and then put everybody to bed. Lately, however, that's looked a little different because now with the cub and the puppy, they require 24-hour supervision. So 1 or 2 handlers will spend the night with the cub and the puppy in one of the small enclosures, making sure that they are safe and comfortable together. And the reason for that is because although they love each other very much and they're very tightly bonded, there is a very large size discrepancy between them. The Anatolian pup, Victor, is twice the mass of the cheetah cub, which means that when they are playing rough, which they still do, they can potentially injure each other. So we have to be within line of sight of them 24 hours a day to make sure that the play doesn't get out of hand and doesn't get too raucous. So then that brings us back to the next morning again, and we do the whole thing over again. Sorry, Bob, I think you're muted.
Thanks for reminding me. I'm trying to be a good participant here. Thank you for your answer to that. Next, we're going to go to Lieutenant Monroe.
Thank you again for your presentation. It was wonderful. I have a kind of guess more of a comment, but definitely a question for you too. I'm a '90s kid, so I grew up in the '90s, and Coca-Cola here gravitated to polar bears, and they were everywhere on sweatshirts, on Coca-Cola bottles. Everyone thought that polar bears were these big, cute, cuddly things, which I think did a disservice to the fact that they're apex predators and they're actually very dangerous and should be respected. So I guess I'm wondering, based on your experience, is large corporations gravitating towards one particular animal good for that species, good for that animal, or is it more damaging based on the way that they market it so that they can sell their product?
Yeah, that's a good point. It can be a double-edged sword. On the one hand, it's beneficial to the species to be able to highlight their plight and draw a lot of attention and resources to conserving the animal, but there definitely are potential downsides. Yeah, mischaracterizing the animal in people's minds, like for example, the apex predator polar bear. Yeah, you're right. It's as cute and cuddly as it looks. you shouldn't try and cuddle one. It's a very bad idea. Same is true of things like of lions and leopards. Don't try and cuddle one. It's a very bad idea. And there's a death toll of tourists visiting the Kruger National Park here in South Africa every year of people who try to do exactly that, despite explicit instructions not to. So yeah, there is definitely a potential downside to doing that. Not just to individuals who push their luck with the animal, but also things like uh, uh, what's the term I use? The fatigue that you experience when you just kind of get sick of hearing about the plight of one specific species over and over and over again. Like the polar bears are a great example of that, but they're not the only example. Uh, the rhinoceros here in South Africa is probably a similar example of that. Also an umbrella species, also a flagship species, but we've been talking about rhinos for 40 years. Like, have we not managed to make any success? It gets to the point where you kind of don't care about rhinos anymore because we've just been talking about them for so long. So yeah, there are definitely are downsides to doing that, and it's a risk that you have to decide whether or not you're prepared to live with that.
Captain Jane.
So, you mentioned that one of the things the whales do is they keep krill populations under control, and rather embarrassing, but I've known that whales eat krill for some time, but I've never really thought about it in those terms. Just how prolific are krill in the oceans then?
Um, so I'm not a marine biologist, but my understanding of it is that krill are pretty widely dispersed through most of the at least paracoastal regions. So within sort of 100 miles or so of the coast where there is food available. Mid-ocean, sort of in the middle of the Pacific, the middle of the Atlantic, you're probably going to see less populations of krill, but it'll still be there. But if it becomes overpopulated, then it has a devastating effect on other species that share the environment with it. Things, whatever it is that krill eat, I'm not even sure what it is that they eat, will suffer as a result. So if you've got more whales, you've got that top-down predation pressure on the krill, which helps to stabilize that whole trophic column.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, that's a good question. I was thinking about the effects of global warming and the warming of the oceans on the krill populations as well. I'm sure that is going to have a negative impact on them in the whole food chain.
Yeah, it may well. The warmer oceans are beneficial for some species and detrimental for other species. And all it does is it just sends the whole thing out of balance. Why you have things like more algal blooms along certain coastal regions now than we had in years past is because of that ocean warming.
Mm-hmm. Captain Van Grunen.
Hi, yes. I want to find out what is your most rewarding experience with dealing with the cheetahs and the cute fluffy puppies.
Yeah, that's an easy one. So working with cheetahs, especially adult cheetahs, cheetahs are naturally very distrustful of any animal that is larger than them. They consider it a threat. Even captive bred cheetahs that have been hand raised, they don't necessarily see humans in general as being something scary. If a human that they don't recognize, that they don't know, approaches them, they'll be frightened of that and wary and will probably wander off. So when you meet an adult cheetah and you spend enough time with him and work with him enough to the point that you actually start to build a real relationship with him, such that you get to the point where you enter his enclosure and he will approach you to greet you. It's hard to explain just how gratifying that is, having that real emotional bond with the cheetah. Part of the methodology that we have for facilitating those cheetah interactions where guests come and stroke the cheetah, the whole safety of that interaction, it hinges on the trust that the handler and the cheetah have with each other. So when I'm curled up on the ground in that photograph that you saw there, and I've got the cheetah who's resting his head in my lap, I have to trust him implicitly, and he has to trust me implicitly that I'm not going to let anything bad happen to him. I'm not going to let anybody come in and pull his tail or yank his fur. I'm going to manage the humans that are coming in to greet him, that they are going to act respectfully and predictably so that there's nothing scary or frightening or surprising that happens. So he can just relax and enjoy the experience, and it's not stressful for him at all. So there's having that sort of trust, that bond with that, what is more or less an apex predator, is extremely gratifying.
I have a question for you. When you're working with farmers and you're approaching a new farmer, new to your program, do you find resistance and skepticism? And if so, do you work with other farmers that have the dogs and have them kind of be an ambassador for your program? And they can say, hey, this works. You know, we have a dog here on our farm and our predation levels have dropped significantly. How do you do with a reluctant farmer?
Yeah, so that you're exactly right. So word of mouth is an invaluable tool when it comes to dealing with these farmers. Because they're not large-scale commercial farmers, they're not doing research on the internet to find out what the optimal strategies are. They're just doing what they were taught to do and figuring it out as they go along. But they talk to each other. And if farmer A has successful results with his Anatolian Shepherd, he's going to tell all of his friends, and they're going to be interested in trying it out. And that's creating those and building and monitoring and managing those social networks is an integral part of what our field agents do. So much so that we actually have a waiting list for our Anatolians at this point. We can't produce enough dogs to satisfy the demand, which is both a good and a bad situation to be in.
That's amazing. So, Cheetah Outreach is, I'm assuming, are you considered like a nonprofit?
So the two separate organizations, Cheetah Outreach itself, which is the educational ecotourism facility that I work with, is not a nonprofit. It's a for-profit. We call it I don't think it's a PTY limited. I think it's a closed corporation. Don't quote me on that. But it is a for-profit organization, but it is owned principally by Cheetah Outreach Trust, which is a nonprofit. That's the organization that runs the conservation mission. So that the profits earned by the educational facility can then flow up to the trust, essentially.
Awesome. I'm pulling up right now. I'm going to put in the chat a link to the trust.
Yes, please do.
Folks want to check that out, and maybe if you feel so inclined to make a donation for the great work that you all are doing.
That would be fantastic. I think there's a link on that page, but if not, please take a look on Facebook for the Cheetah Outreach Trust USA, which is an affiliate of ours based in the United States. It's a 501c3 corporation, whichever one is a charity, so that you can make donations in the United States to our work and get the relevant tax benefits.
Nice. Captain Jane.
Hey, you may have said this already, but how many cheetahs do you have at your facility right now?
We have 7 ambassador cheetahs at the moment, 6 adults and 1 cub. All of our adults are male. Because cheetah females are solitary, they require a lot more space than the males. Males are intensely social. They will share enclosures with their brothers in their coalitions, and even outside of their coalitions, although they are territorial against other cheetahs, they just don't require as much space. Because they're more social, it is somewhat easier to develop and manage relationships with the cheetah males, and also the females are in higher demand with the breeding facilities. So it's easier for us to obtain male cheetahs than it would be for females. We have had female ambassadors in the past, but typically we find that it's easier to work with males. So that's usually what we do.
Oh, thanks.
Any other questions? Well, Owen, I want to thank you so very much for again sharing your knowledge with Starfleet and with sciences. I always enjoy your talks, and I hope that we can get you to come back next year for the speaker series. Because each talk you do is different, has more information than the one before. And for those of you who did not attend Project Earth, he did a presentation for us there, so you can go on Starfleet's YouTube channel to watch that if you want to learn even more about cheetahs. Before we go, I want to let you know about our upcoming Sol Speaker events. On August 23rd at the usual time, 11 a.m. Eastern Daylight Time, I really worked hard to get this speaker. When I did a search for paleontologists, I thought, hey, we need to branch out a little bit. And I saw this talk titled Crocodiles, the Horse Hunter and the Balrog. And this speaker is Dr. Alexander Hastings. He's the Fitzpatrick Chair of Paleontology at the Science Museum of Minnesota. And he is talking about crocodiles, and in particular, a species that is, they are horse hunters. We're horse hunters. And I can't imagine a crocodile chasing down a horse. But it sounds like it's going to be a pretty fantastic talk. And I believe these were located in Europe and in Germany in particular. So I'm hoping our Region 20 friends will be interested in that one. September 20th at 11 a.m., our own Chief of Education here at Sciences, Diane Ripalone, is going to be doing a talk called Above the Clouds, A Science Educator's Journey with NASA's Flying Observatory. She actually got to participate in a couple of missions, and it's going to talk all about that experience. And we're working on filling up the rest of the year, and looking forward to an exciting 2026 as well. So please come back next time. It's great to see everyone. Owen, have a great trip back to South Africa through the Zoom line.
Thank you very much for this opportunity. I always enjoy a chance to talk ad nauseum about cheetahs.
All right. Well, everyone have a great rest of your day or evening or morning, wherever you're from.